I want to spend some time today reflecting on the first reading, because it's very important. At this time of Ezekiel, people thought it was fair that if the dad did something wrong and you were wronged, you could do something to the son, the way it was in the culture there. In fact, in the gospel and in the Old Testament, we hear, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That was to stop the whole thing if somebody aggrieved you of taking extreme means. So there was a tension there. Even though the son had done nothing wrong, the father did, they would punish the son. But when we actually read this prophecy from the 18th chapter of Ezekiel, and he's one of the four major prophets in the Old Testament. He starts off his chapter with this. It's not in the reading today, but it says, "The parents ate the sour grapes, and the teeth of the children were set on edge." The adults did something wrong, but it was the children who were suffering from that. And what Ezekiel is telling us today, no more will this be the law in Israel. Now, if you read to philosophers like Socrates and people like that, that was 200 years afterwards. But here we are 200 years before Socrates. God is telling us in prophecy that we are individually responsible for our choices, not somebody else. And that's a different way of thinking. So it's a major switch in how we think as human beings. Sometimes in fact, I would encourage you to read the entire 18th chapter of Ezekiel. It's about a page and a half long, all right? You can handle that. But it's a beautiful expression of what God is telling us, that we as moral people, moral agents, are personally responsible. Well, how do we talk about this? Because we make all kinds of choices. Well, St. Thomas Aquinas had a way of talking about this. He would say there are two kinds of acts. One is the act of man, and one is the idea of a moral agent. For example, if I sneeze, he would say, well, that's just an act of a person. It's just an act of man. It's not any morality to it. You might have an allergy and you sneeze, or somebody walks out in front of you and you weren't prepared for that, and they kind of startle you and you jump or something like that. He said, those are not human actions. They're acts of people, yes. But those are out of instinct. It's just one of those things that happens. There's also this act of humanum, as he would call it, the act of the human being. And that kind of action, it engages the mind, engages the heart. We start thinking about it. Should I not? And that's when it becomes a human act. And for that, we're responsible for that. Now, we do live in a culture. We're part of all of humanity on the face of the earth. There are cults, tribes, families. I mean, all those things are there, and they do put pressure on us, if I might use that word. It influences us. That's something that is there. So we have to kind of think about that. But when it comes to these moral things, we will stand before God all by ourselves. You will not be able to blame your mom, your dad, your child, your priest. I won't be there at that. When you stand before the throne of God, when I stand before the throne of God, I'm on my own 2 feet. Nobody's going to be there to help me. Nobody's going to be there to fix it for me. It doesn't work like that. We will stand before the face of God. And that's where our judgment will be. Every one of us, the Pope, me, all of you, that will happen. And those things that you are responsible for, God will put them on the scale. That's what he does. That's what he promised to do. And that's what Thomas would call a human act. Now, we make lots of choices. We make lots of choices. And some of those choices really have no morality to them. You know, I'm going to have a ham sandwich or a turkey sandwich. I mean, that doesn't have morality. You might want to have chocolate ice cream or kale. That might be, no. Okay, now I better not go there. But those are just things we do. But there's a lot of other things that have profound ramifications. There's a beautiful scene in The Man of All Seasons when Thomas More is being lobbied by several of his friends to go ahead and just give in to Henry VIII. You know, everybody else is joining in. You know, all but one bishop in all of England, all the bishops but one went along with Henry VIII. They wanted to be more English than Catholic. But the one bishop, he stayed firm. So they're talking to Thomas More, and they're trying to convince him. And he said, his friend said, why are you standing for this thing of Catholic, for this thing of the church? And he simply said, because I believe. In the fullness of his humanness, he said, I believe. And that's a moral act. It's a human act of the highest level. I believe. And he would not throw away his belief, even at the cost of his life. Because there are some things more important than our lives. And we all know that. Some things are more important. And God must come first. He must. But if we choose in these moral decisions, if we decide, well, it's not a big deal, so infidelity, stealing, gossiping, prejudicial actions, all those kinds of things, if that's not really a big deal. Like little white lies, it's not a big deal. Yes, it is. Moral choices bring us holiness or evil. Just not a middle ground. Well, I really believe, Monsignor, but I only go to Mass once a month. Well, what? How can we say that? And that becomes part of what we're doing. If we listen to John Paul II, when he was writing some of his real expertise was in moral theology. And he talked about when we do these human acts and we listen to the Lord and follow what the Lord is asking us to do, he says a couple of things happen. He says these choices are like building blocks of a house. And every time we do those moral, good choices, we build the house as a brick by brick. But if we go into these things, these immoral things, what happens is the brick is there, but it poisons the mortar that holds the brick together. And after time, that mortar fails, and the bricks fall, and the house falls. And what a fall it will be, as Jesus said. So we have to manage that and look at those decisions, those choices, those human actions that make such a difference in our lives. Now again, be careful. Not every choice is going to make a difference. Things like turkey or ham for a sandwich. I mean, that really doesn't make any difference. But other things do, and we know those things. And as we hear that when we repent, go to confession, we can get back on the right track. Those sins can be forgiven. But Monsignor, they're just little things. No, they are not. They are not. There's no such thing as a little sin. It does not exist. For that one little, quote unquote, white lie, Jesus died on the cross for you. For that one tiny little thing, he died on the cross for you. Every sin is big. It's big. It's evil. It has rancor in it. And it just gets in there. And that's not a good thing. Because one day, you and I, and I'm getting a lot closer to that day, so I'm going to confession more, we're going to stand before the face of God. And we will not be able to say, it really didn't matter. We won't be able to say that to God. Well, it was just a little sin. We will not be able to say that to God. Because it's not. It's not truth. So when that day comes, and we stand before the Lord, judgment seat and all, we won't escape it. But let's live such a good life that when it does come, God will see that we listen to him. And like the son that went out, I don't want to, but he actually did what the Father said. And then Jesus will say, welcome, welcome home. Join me in beauty.